who was Kierkegaard, and why is he so often regarded as the father of existentialism?
Okay, so so he's a Danish thinker who never really classified himself as a philosopher.
Mm,
He's a philosopher, but he certainly did philosophical work, theological work, and also a poet. In fact, he would often refer to himself as a poet in the German Romantic tradition of Goethe and that kind of thing, where
mm,
poetry wasn't just understood as in stanzas and things like that. And his years were from 1813 to 1855, and it was a time of great political turmoil in Denmark, where they had a peaceful switch from a monarchy to a parliamentary system. So it was a time of tremendous turmoil. Also, a time when the mass media was coming into. There was more newspapers and things like that, more literacy in Denmark.
mm,
So it was a real time of great change. Now, the reason he's widely and I think rightfully considered the father of existentialism is because he addresses a number of themes that are a number of things that, for example, the theme he focuses on the theme of the individual as opposed to the mass, right? I think
mhm,
that's an important one. It focuses a great deal on freedom,
mhm,
right? And the idea that the great choices in life, say between faith and unfaith, between trying to be a righteous person and not caring about that, are
mhm,
either ors that can't be answered by objective facts or data, right? He also addresses moods in a way that's that no one else had before. Moods like anxiety and depression. The book, The
mm,
Concept of Anxiety,
mhm.
which interestingly enough is incomprehensible. I mean, it's the most difficult book, and it still sells like crazy just because of the title. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and he's also one of the things that um, I took heed of was he has this inside out perspective, right? This first person perspective that he uses a lot.
Mm,
For example, and this goes back to the either or between objectivity and subjectivity. He in the concluding on scientific postscript, which is his most philosophical work. He goes on for a couple of pages about literally a couple of pages listing all the facts about death, and then says all these objective facts don't tell me what it means that I'm going to die. So with Kierkegaard comes this question of personal meaning, what
mhm,
what these things mean to me, which is uh, wasn't addressed as so clearly, but wasn't addressed by more uh, more objective type of philosophy.
mm,
So there's no sense of within the limits of reason. So
mm.
those are some of the themes that connect him with that make him the groundwork of the existential position.
That's so fascinating to me because when you're just listing off all these topics and all the ideas that he's kind of associated with, it reminds me a lot of the main topics of our generation right now. You mentioned freedom, you mentioned individualism, you mentioned objectivity versus subjectivity. All these personal like personal, I guess, like becoming. All these ideas are things that I believe my generation, our generation, especially now in the time we're in, are focused on, are struggling with. You obviously look back in with anxiety, and I think one of the questions I had too was that it is interesting to see that someone, from back then you mentioned could have put their hand on such ideas that kind of, are prevalent now. Do you think that's a surprise that that he could like, pull these ideas from from for him would be the future? Or do you think it's just these ideas have been prevalent for all eternity?
No, I think he was really good at reading where culture was heading.
Mm,
Very good at that. For example, in the concept of anxiety, he uh, and I should before you go on with this part, I should
mm.
mention that he wrote most of his classics in pseudonyms. So
Yes.
the books we know that him well for, Concept of Anxiety, Fear and Trembling, all those books are written in pseudonyms, and at the same time he would write a pseudonymous work, he'd write another work in his own name, which is
Mm,
a ethical religious discourse. But so in the concept that, and each, I think each pseudonym represents a different perspective on life. So
mm,
the pseudonym that writes the concept of anxiety is Vigilius Hoffdiensis, Watchman of the Harbor, and he's a psychologist. And in that book, Kierkegaard's pseudonym makes it clear that he thinks in the future anxiety is going to be treated with pills and powder. You're going to see the medicalization of experience
mm,
very early on. Yet at the same time, he contends in that book that anxiety is a sign that we're spirits, because it's how we appropriate, really understand that we're free,
mhm,
right? And so one of the examples, and this is something that Sartre, Heidegger, all the other existentialist thinkers took from him. This connection between anxiety and freedom. You know that what makes you nervous when you're, the famous classical example is, what makes you nervous when you stand by a cliff isn't the the cliff itself. It's the fact that you could decide to jump over, right? You know what I mean? Yeah.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
so he talks about anxiety as this. It shows us that we're spirits, right?
Mm,
But he also recognizes that anxiety can be taken in the wrong way and be very dangerous, can lead to suicide. But in the last chapter of that book, he has a few lines where he says, to learn to be anxious in the right way is to learn the highest in life. So you see
mm,
this positive connotations of anxiety for him,
mhm,
which conflict with, now it's for modern times, just a symptom. It's it's something we always want to be rid of. And I have a friend who's a psychological epidemiologist, and he even he's argued that used to be we're in the age of anxiety, right? That famous
mm,
poem. But he says that now we've entered into the age of where everyone's having panic attacks. Right? So
mm.
it's everything's, so this medicalization of experience, I think he could foresee and argues against.
I want to know also like delve into that actually later on. But before we do that, there's a few topics that you mentioned that I think is fascinating to look at from Kierkegaard's perspective. So you talked about the individual as opposed to the mass. I think that's a very interesting idea, that we all have our own individual experience and that it's important for us to understand that experience rather than to just take on what the mass or what the society kind of like puts on you. What are some of the things that Kierkegaard said about that idea and how did he come to a realization or solution about how to kind of like balance those two?
Well, I think with all the social movements going on, he was just concerned that people are just going to get their identity from the group, and
Mm,
that's all. Not step out as individuals and see themselves as individuals. So there's all these social movements going on throughout Europe at the time, and he was very concerned that people would no longer see themselves as individuals, and
mm,
their values would all come from the group, right? They wouldn't come up with their own perspective on life,
mm,
right? And Nietzsche always worries about this too.
yeah.
Nietzsche Nietzsche recognized it wasn't all good, this death of God stuff, because
Hmm.
he feared there was going to be a vacuum of values. And I can, and there'd be nothing sacred. The only thing that people would care about is getting their slippers and their TV sets and comfort, their iPhones. And I see that, not to go off the track, but
Mm,
we're really in the United States dealing with a would-be emperor. And
mm,
but I think the emperor will let us keep all our toys, the privileged classes. We'll keep all our toys, but it'll be a whole different structure.
I
But
mean,
we better not go too far there.
yeah,
I
yeah,
guess.
I'm just gonna say, I mean, it's often how these empires fall, right? You look at Rome and kind of that's what they did, these massive, colosseums and the play just to
Mm.
kind of like distract people from the real issues. But like you said, we better not go too far in that direction
Yeah.
either. Okay, so I think on that then, on Kierkegaard's ideas, going further into it, one of the ways I was introduced to him was through his book Fear and Trembling.